The colony ship Gentle Current drifted through the empty space between stars, carrying 50,000 souls toward a new home. The massive vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its silver hull gleaming under distant starlight. Inside, the Zephyrian families had been traveling for 8 months, fleeing their dying homeworld in search of a planet where their children could grow up safely. Commander Thorell stood in the bridge, watching the navigation displays with tired eyes. The Zephyrians were a peaceful people, tall and slender with pale blue skin and large, gentle eyes. Their homeworld had been a place of soft breezes and floating cities, where conflict was solved through discussion and violence was almost unknown. Now their son was dying, and they had no choice but to leave everything behind. "Commander," called Officer Marin from the communications station, her voice filled with the same weariness they all felt. "We are still on course for the Kepler system. Another 2 weeks and we should reach our new home." Thorell nodded slowly. The Kepler system had been chosen because it was far from the major space lanes, away from the aggressive species that dominated the galaxy. The Zephyrians had learned long ago that their peaceful nature made them targets for those who saw weakness as opportunity. In the residential sections, families tried to make the best of their cramped quarters. Children played quiet games while parents told stories of the beautiful world they had left behind. The elders spoke hopefully of the new planet waiting for them, where they could build cities among the trees and live in harmony with nature once again. But their peace was not to last. The first sign of trouble came when the ship's sensors detected multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace around them. Thorell felt his blood turn cold as 6 large warships appeared on the display, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. "Commander," Marin's voice cracked with fear. "They're Korthak vessels, battle cruisers." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Everyone knew about the Korthak hegemony. They were a militaristic empire that spread across dozens of star systems, conquering weaker species and enslaving them. The Korthaks were reptilian predators from a harsh world, with sharp teeth and claws built for hunting and killing. "Open communications," Thorell ordered, though his voice shook. "Perhaps we can reason with them." The main screen flickered to life, showing the scarred face of a Korthak commander. His yellow eyes gleamed with cruel intelligence and his mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. Behind him, other Korthak warriors moved about their bridge, checking weapons and preparing for battle. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Hegemony Fleet," the alien commander spoke, his voice a harsh growl. "Your ship will surrender immediately. Prepare to be boarded." "Please." Thorell stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We are civilians, refugees. We carry no weapons and pose no threat to anyone. We seek only passage to a new home." Vextar's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Refugees make the best slaves. They are already broken and hopeless. Your people will serve the hegemony well." "We have children aboard," Thorell pleaded. "Families. Please show mercy." "Mercy is weakness," Vextar snarled. "And weakness deserves only death or slavery. You have 10 minutes to shut down your engines and prepare for boarding. Resist and we will kill half your population as an example." The communication ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Thorell looked around at his crew, seeing the same hopeless fear in their eyes that he felt in his heart. The Gentle Current had no weapons, no shields worth mentioning. They were a colony ship, built for carrying families safely through space, not for fighting wars. "Commander," Officer Marin whispered, "what do we do?" Thorell closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of all the children sleeping peacefully in the residential sections, trusting the adults to keep them safe. When he opened them again, his decision was made. "Send a wide-spectrum distress signal," he ordered. "All frequencies, maximum power. Include our coordinates and our situation." "Sir, there's no one to hear us out here," another officer said quietly. "We're between the spiral arms, far from any inhabited systems." "Send it anyway," Thorell replied firmly. "If we are to die, let the galaxy know what happened to us. Perhaps someone somewhere will care enough to remember." Marin's hands flew over her controls. "Signal broadcasting on all frequencies. Maximum range." On the main screen, they could see the Korthak ships moving closer, their weapon ports glowing red as they charged their guns. Small fighter craft began launching from the larger vessels, swarming toward the Gentle Current like hungry predators. The first impacts shook the ship as the Korthaks fired warning shots across their bow. Then came the boarding pods, metal cylinders that slammed into the hull and burned through the outer armor. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as atmosphere hissed out through the breaches. "They're coming through decks 7 and 12, reported the tactical officer. "Security teams are responding, but they all knew it was hopeless. The Zephyrians had no military tradition, no weapons training. Their security teams carried stun batons meant for dealing with the occasional drunk passenger, not repelling armed invaders. The sounds of fighting echoed through the ship's corridors. Screams, the harsh bark of Korthak weapons, the terrified cries of children. Thirell watched helplessly as red lights spread across his damage control board, showing where the invaders had taken control of section after section. "Commander," Marin called out, her voice breaking. "They've reached the family sections. They're taking prisoners." Through the ship's internal cameras, they could see Korthak warriors herding groups of Zephyrian families toward their boarding craft. The aliens moved with brutal efficiency, stunning anyone who tried to resist and dragging away the unconscious. Children cried for their parents while the Korthak separated families, sorting them like cargo. "Keep broadcasting," Thirell ordered, his hands clenched into fists. "Someone has to hear us." The distress signal continued to pulse out into the darkness, a desperate cry for help that seemed to disappear into the vast emptiness of space. In the message, Marin had included everything: their peaceful nature, the presence of children and families, the brutality of their attackers. It was a plea not just for rescue, but for someone to care that innocent people were suffering. As the Korthaks reached the bridge, Thirell stood straight and faced them with as much dignity as he could manage. The lead warrior was a massive brute with scars covering his arms and face, clearly a veteran of many conquests. "You are the commander," the Korthak growled, pointing a wicked-looking weapon at Thirell's chest. "You will come with us. Your ship is now property of the hegemony. And my people?" Thirell asked quietly. The warrior's teeth showed in what might have been a smile. "They will learn to serve. Or they will die. The choice is theirs." As they dragged him away, Thirell could only hope that somehow, somewhere in the vast galaxy, someone had heard their desperate call for help. But space was so large, and they were so very far from anyone who might care about the fate of one small colony ship and its cargo of innocent refugees. The signal continued to broadcast, carrying their story out into the darkness, searching for anyone with the power and will to answer their desperate plea. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the dreadnought Indomitable Fury, studying the tactical displays that showed her fleet's position deep in human space. 12 warships moved in perfect formation through the void, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had been designed by a species that understood war better than most. The human fleet was conducting training exercises in a system far from Earth, practicing maneuvers that might be needed if their long isolation ever came to an end. For over 2 centuries, humanity had remained largely separate from galactic civilization, marked as a quarantine species from a Class 12 death world. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached from the communication station, his face showing the kind of concern that made Chen immediately pay attention. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress signal. Wide-spectrum broadcast, maximum power." "Origin?" Chen asked, turning from the display. "Unknown vessel approximately 47 light-years from our current position. The signal is unusual, ma'am." Chen raised an eyebrow. After 30 years in the fleet, very little surprised her anymore. "Define unusual." "It's from a species we haven't encountered before. They call themselves Zephyrians. The message indicates they're refugees under attack by something called the Korthak hegemony." The name sent a chill through the bridge crew. The humans had been monitoring galactic communications for decades, learning about the various species and governments beyond their borders. The Korthak hegemony was well known to human intelligence as one of the more brutal empires in local space. "Put it on the main screen," Chen ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and suddenly they could hear the desperation in an alien voice speaking words their computers quickly translated. The message told of a colony ship filled with families, of peaceful refugees seeking only a new home, of children crying as armored warriors dragged them away from their parents. The bridge fell silent as the message played. Chen watched her crew's faces, seeing the same anger building in their eyes that she felt in her own chest. Humanity might be isolated from the galaxy, but they had never lost their instinct to protect the innocent. Analysis, Chen said quietly when the message ended. Commander Hayes, her tactical officer, pulled up the relevant data. The Korthaks are a known slaver species, ma'am. Intelligence reports indicate they've been expanding their operations in this sector for the past several years. This fits their pattern. Distance and travel time? 47 light-years. At maximum hyperspace velocity, we could reach them in 18 hours. Chen stared at the star chart, her mind racing through the implications. Officially, humanity was supposed to avoid contact with other species. The galactic community had made it clear that humans were considered too dangerous for normal diplomatic relations. Earth was quarantined, and human ships were supposed to stay within their designated space. But she thought about the voice in that message, the desperation of a parent pleading for the lives of children. She thought about her own daughter, safe, at home on Earth, and what she would want someone to do if their positions were reversed. Ma'am? Hayes asked quietly. Your orders? Chen looked around the bridge at her crew. These were men and women who had volunteered to serve humanity's first and only space fleet. They had trained for years, preparing for threats that might never come. Now finally, they had a chance to use their skills for something that mattered. Set course for the distress signal coordinates, she ordered. Maximum speed, all ships. Admiral, Lieutenant Rodriguez said carefully, that will take us outside our authorized patrol zone. Command will want an explanation. Tell Command we're investigating a potential threat to human space, Chen replied. Which is true enough. If the Korthaks are expanding in this direction, they might eventually become our problem. But everyone on the bridge knew the real reason. The message had mentioned children. As the fleet changed course and jumped into hyperspace, Chen studied everything their computers could tell them about the Korthak hegemony. They were a reptilian species from a high-gravity world, evolved as pack hunters with a natural tendency toward aggression and dominance. Their society was built around the concept of strength ruling over weakness, and they saw other species as either useful servants or obstacles to be eliminated. The Korthaks had conquered 17 different species over the past 3 centuries, using superior numbers and ruthless tactics to overwhelm their enemies. They took slaves from the survivors, working them to death in mines and factories across their empire. Intelligence reports suggested they had millions of beings in bondage, treated as nothing more than property. They won't expect us, Hayes observed, studying the tactical data. Human military capabilities are largely unknown to the galactic community. Chen nodded grimly. That was both an advantage and a problem. Humanity's isolation meant their enemies wouldn't know what to expect, but it also meant no one would come to help if things went wrong. Not that they would need help. The human fleet had been built with one purpose: to protect Earth and human colonies from any threat the galaxy might present. Every ship was designed by engineers who understood that in space, there was no such thing as overkill. The indomitable Fury alone carried enough firepower to level a planet's surface. Its armor was built to withstand weapons that could crack moons. Its crew had trained in simulations based on every known form of space combat, learning tactics that drew on humanity's long history of warfare. ETA to target? Chen asked. 16 hours, 43 minutes at current speed, the navigation officer reported. All ships, combat readiness level 1, Chen ordered. I want every weapon system checked, every piece of armor inspected. When we arrive, we're going to war. Throughout the fleet, the order was received with grim satisfaction. The crews had been waiting their entire careers for a chance to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Now they would have that chance, fighting not for territory or resources, but for the lives of innocent refugees who had nowhere else to turn. As the hours passed, Chen found herself thinking about the message they had received. The Zephyrians sounded like a peaceful people, the kind who had never imagined they might need warriors to protect them. They had sent their desperate plea into the darkness, not knowing if anyone would hear or care enough to respond. They were about to learn that their SOS had reached the one species in the galaxy that understood both the horror of being hunted and the determination needed to fight back. Humanity had crawled up from the bottom of a food chain on a world where everything wanted to kill them. They had learned to be predators themselves, but they had never forgotten what it felt like to be prey. The Korthaks were about to discover why the rest of the galaxy kept humanity quarantined. It wasn't fear of what humans might do to enemies that concerned the galactic community. It was fear of what humans might do for friends. In 18 hours, Admiral Vextar and his fleet would learn the difference between conquering the weak and facing the Deathworlders Armada of wrath. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, like predators emerging from the shadows. 12 warships materialized in perfect formation, their sensors immediately scanning for targets while their weapons powered up with deadly efficiency. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Fury, watching the tactical display as it painted a picture of the situation. The Zephyrian colony ship, Gentle Current, hung motionless in space, its hull scarred by weapon impacts and boarding actions. Around it, 6 Korthak vessels moved with the casual arrogance of victors claiming their prize. "Assessment," Chen ordered, her voice calm despite the anger building in her chest. Commander Hayes worked quickly at his station, analyzing the sensor data. The colony ship is heavily damaged but intact. Life signs show approximately 45,000 Zephyrians still aboard, but sensors indicate another 5,000 have been transferred to the Korthak vessels. "Prisoners," Chen said quietly, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. "Yes, ma'am. The Korthak fleet consists of 3 battle cruisers, 2 assault carriers, and 1 command ship. Standard slaver configuration with holding cells for captured populations." Chen studied the enemy formation. The Korthaks had arranged their ships in a loose circle around the colony vessel, their weapons trained on the helpless refugees, while boarding shuttles continued to ferry prisoners back and forth. It was an efficient operation, the kind that spoke of long practice in the business of enslaving other species. "Range to target, 2 million kilometers in closing. We'll be in weapons range in 4 minutes. Open communications with the colony ship first," Chen ordered. "I want to confirm they requested assistance." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Gentle Current. The Zephyrians looked exactly as their distress message had suggested. Tall, slender beings with pale blue skin and large, gentle eyes that now showed the exhaustion of defeat. The commander was missing, probably taken prisoner, but an officer stepped forward to respond. "I am Officer Marin of the colony ship." "Gentle Current," the alien said, her voice barely controlled. "Are you responding to our distress call?" "This is Admiral Chen of the human fleet," Chen replied. "We received your message and have come to provide assistance." "Are you still under attack?" Marin's eyes widened at the word human. Even out here, far from the main trade routes, the name carried weight. "You are from the quarantine zone? The Deathworld species?" "We are," Chen confirmed. "And we are here to help. Please stand by." Chen ended the communication and immediately opened a channel to the Korthak fleet. The response came quickly, the main screen showing the bridge of what was obviously the command ship. The Korthak commander was exactly what she had expected, a large reptilian predator with scarred armor and cold yellow eyes that spoke of casual cruelty. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Korthak hegemony," the alien growled, his voice filled with arrogant confidence. "You will identify yourselves and state your business in this system." "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet," she replied, her voice steady and professional. "You are ordered to immediately release all prisoners and withdraw from the system." Vextar's laugh was like the sound of breaking bones. Behind him, other Korthak warriors looked up from their stations, amused by what they obviously considered an absurd demand. "Humans," Vextar said, his tone dripping with contempt. "I have heard stories about your species. Primitive savages from a backwater world, hiding behind quarantine barriers because you lack the courage to face civilized space." "You've been misinformed," Chen said calmly. "This is your only warning. Release the prisoners and withdraw, or face the consequences." Vextar leaned forward, his teeth showing in what might have been a smile. "I see 6 small ships against my battle fleet. Your mathematics are as poor as your judgment. Perhaps I should teach you respect for your betters." The Korthak commander gestured to someone off-screen, and suddenly a smaller window opened on the display. It showed a group of Zephyrian prisoners, including several young children, kneeling in what was obviously the Korthak ship's holding area. The children were crying, clinging to their parents while armed guards stood over them. "Watch carefully, human," Vextar said, his voice filled with cruel pleasure. This is what happens when primitive species challenge the hegemony. Chen felt something cold and terrible settle into her stomach as she realized what was about to happen. Around the bridge, her crew watched in stunned silence as Vextar drew his sidearm, a wicked-looking energy weapon that hummed with deadly power. No, Chen said, but she knew she was too far away to stop what was coming. Vextar pointed his weapon at the smallest child, a Zephyrian youth who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The child looked up with wide, terrified eyes that held no understanding of why these monsters wanted to hurt him. For the glory of the hegemony, Vextar said, and pulled the trigger. The energy bolt struck the child in the chest, and he crumpled to the deck without a sound. The other prisoners screamed, the parents trying desperately to shield their remaining children while the Korthak guards laughed. On the bridge of the indomitable fury, absolute silence fell. Chen felt something break inside her chest, a rage so pure and cold that it seemed to freeze the air in her lungs. Around her, she could see the same terrible anger building in her crew's faces. Vextar was still talking. Something about teaching lessons and showing proper respect. But Chen was no longer listening to his words. She was studying his face, memorizing every scale and scar, noting the casual way he holstered his weapon after murdering a child. "Admiral?" Commander Hayes asked quietly. His voice was steady, but she could hear the controlled fury underneath. Chen looked around the bridge at her crew. These were men and women who had sworn an oath to protect humanity and its allies. They had trained for years to face threats from the stars, learning to fight with the tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency that their species had developed. Over millions of years of evolution, the Korthaks had just reminded them why those skills existed. "All ships," Chen said, her voice carrying across the fleet communications. "Battle stations. Weapons free. Target the enemy fleet." She looked back at the screen where Vextar was still speaking, apparently unaware that he had just signed his own death warrant. "Admiral Vextar," she said, interrupting his words, "you wanted to teach us respect for our betters. Allow me to return the favor." The last thing Vextar saw before the communication ended was Admiral Chen's expression changing from diplomatic professionalism to something that made every predatory instinct he possessed scream warnings. For just a moment, the Korthak commander felt what his victims had always felt, the terrible knowledge that a bigger predator had just noticed him. But by then, it was far too late to run. What happened next could not properly be called a battle. It was an extermination. The first salvo from the human fleet struck the Korthak vessels with the force of concentrated starlight. Weapons that had been designed by a species raised in the crucible of Earth's endless competition unleashed their fury across space, and the enemy ships staggered under impacts they had never imagined possible. Admiral Vextar's command ship shuddered as its shields collapsed under the initial bombardment. Around him, his bridge crew scrambled at their stations, their earlier confidence evaporating as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. "Impossible," Vextar snarled, watching his tactical display as 3 of his ships went dark in the first 10 seconds of combat. "They're primitives. Savages." His tactical officer looked up from his station, fear replacing arrogance in his yellow eyes. "Admiral, their weapons, they're using some kind of focused particle beam technology. Our armor is being cut apart like paper." On the indomitable fury, Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The human ships moved with predatory grace, their formations designed around hunting pack tactics that had been refined over centuries of warfare. Each vessel knew its role, knew how to support its packmates, knew how to deliver maximum damage while avoiding enemy fire. "Target the assault carriers next," Chen ordered. "Those are the ships holding the prisoners." Commander Hayes nodded, his fingers dancing across his controls. "All ships focus fire on enemy vessels designated Alpha 4 and Alpha 5, precision strikes only. We need those ships intact enough to recover survivors." The human fleet responded with the coordination of a wolf pack taking down prey. The indomitable fury and 3 destroyer escorts concentrated their fire on the first assault carrier, their weapons carefully calibrated to disable rather than destroy. Beam weapons sliced through the ship's engine sections, while kinetic rounds punched holes in non-critical areas, crippling the vessel without risking the lives of the prisoners inside. The second assault carrier tried to run, its captain apparently realizing that this was not a fight he could win, but human ships had been built for pursuit. Designed by engineers who understood that sometimes the most important battle was the one fought to prevent an enemy from escaping. The destroyer. Relentless Hunter broke formation and gave chase, its engines burning white-hot as it accelerated past the limits that would have torn apart vessels built by most species. The Korthak ship was fast, but it had been designed for intimidating weaker enemies, not outrunning predators from a world where only the swiftest survived. The human destroyer caught its prey within minutes, precise shots disabling the assault carrier's engines and leaving it drifting helpless in space. The captain tried to surrender, but Chen had already made it clear that surrender was not an option for those who murdered children. Meanwhile, the remaining Korthak battlecruisers tried to form a defensive formation, their commanders finally understanding that they faced something beyond their experience. These were not the usual victims of hegemony expansion, peaceful species with defensive fleets designed more for show than combat. These were warriors from a world that had taught them the true meaning of war. The battlecruiser, Bloody Claw, managed to score several hits on the human cruiser, Titan's Wrath. But the human ship absorbed the damage and kept fighting. Its captain, Commander Rodriguez, had grown up on Luna Colony, where equipment failure meant death in the vacuum. His ship had been built with the same philosophy: redundant systems, armored compartments, and the ability to keep fighting even when half destroyed. Hull breach on Deck 7, his damage control officer reported. Sealing emergency bulkheads now. Maintain fire, Rodriguez ordered, watching as his weapons tore chunks from the enemy vessel's hull. Target their weapon systems. I want them helpless, not dead. That was the difference between human warfare and Korthak conquest. The Korthaks fought to dominate and enslave. The humans fought to protect. And that meant they needed survivors to tell the story of what happened when you threatened the innocent. Admiral Vextar watched his fleet die around him, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. The humans fought with a combination of technical superiority and tactical brilliance that spoke of a species raised in constant conflict. Their ships were built like fortresses, their weapons designed for maximum efficiency, their crews trained to a level that suggested warfare was as natural to them as breathing. Sir, his communications officer called out, the Bone Crusher is requesting permission to surrender. Denied, Vextar snarled. No retreat, no surrender. Signal all ships. Ram the human vessels if necessary. But his fleet was already broken. One by one, the Korthak ships fell silent as human weapons found their targets. The humans showed no mercy to those who had shown none to children, but they were careful to leave survivors. Witnesses who could carry word back to the hegemony about what happened when slavers faced the wrath of Earth's children. As the last enemy guns fell silent, Chen turned her attention to the most important part of the operation, rescuing the prisoners. She had already dispatched boarding parties to the disabled assault carriers, human Marines trained in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue. Master Sergeant Williams led the assault on the first carrier, his team moving through the damaged corridors with the efficiency of predators in their element. The Korthak guards they encountered offered fierce resistance, but they were facing humans in powered armor, soldiers who had trained for this exact scenario. Prisoner bay located, Williams reported over the comm. Multiple Zephyrian civilians, including children. They're alive but traumatized. Secure the area and begin evacuation, Chen ordered. Medical teams are standing by. The rescued Zephyrians stared in amazement as human soldiers, their faces hidden behind armored masks, gently lifted children and helped the wounded toward safety. These same beings who had just destroyed an entire fleet with ruthless efficiency were now kneeling beside frightened youngsters, offering water and speaking in soft, reassuring voices. One young Zephyrian girl, her pale blue skin marked with bruises from Korthak brutality, looked up at Sergeant Williams with wide eyes. "Are you really from the Death World?" she whispered. Williams removed his helmet, showing a scarred face that had seen too many battles but eyes that were gentle as he looked down at the child. "Yes, little one. But we're the good monsters. We only hunt the bad ones." As the evacuation continued, Admiral Vextar found himself dragged before Admiral Chen in the brig of his own ship. The human admiral looked down at him with eyes that held no anger now, only cold judgment. "You murdered a child," Chen said quietly, in front of his parents, for no reason except to cause pain. Vextar tried to summon his earlier arrogance, but the sight of his destroyed fleet visible through the viewport made it impossible. "You know nothing of the hegemony's power," he said weakly. "This will bring retaliation, war." "Good," Chen replied. "We've been looking forward to meeting your friends. You're going to carry a message back to them. Tell your leaders that humanity has heard the cries of the innocent, and we are coming to answer them." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Tell them that the Deathworlders are no longer content to hide behind quarantine barriers. Tell them that every slaver, every tyrant, every being who preys on the weak now has something new to fear." As the human fleet prepared to escort the rescued Zephyrians to safety, word of the battle was already spreading through subspace communications. The galaxy was about to learn that the monsters from Earth had finally decided to become the heroes that the innocent had always needed. 3 days after the battle, the human fleet arrived at the Kepler system where the Zephyrians had planned to build their new home. The planet hung before them like a blue-green jewel, covered in forests and oceans that reminded the refugees of their lost homeworld. Admiral Chen stood in the medical bay of the Indomitable Fury, watching as human doctors worked alongside Zephyrian healers to tend the rescued prisoners. The children were recovering fastest, their natural resilience helped by the gentle care they received from humans who understood that protecting the young was the most sacred duty of any species. The little girl who had asked Sergeant Williams about the Death World was among them, her bruises fading as she played with a group of human and Zephyrian children. She had taken to following Dr. Martinez around the medical bay, asking endless questions about Earth and its people. "Is it true that your world tries to kill you every day?" she asked, looking up at the doctor with wide, curious eyes. Dr. Martinez smiled as she checked the child's healing wounds. "It's a dangerous place," she admitted. "But that's what made us strong enough to help people like you." Officer Marin approached Admiral Chen, her pale blue features showing a combination of gratitude and amazement that was becoming familiar among the Zephyrian survivors. "Admiral," she said formally, "I bring word from our Council of Elders. They wish to know how we can possibly repay what you have done for us." Chen shook her head. "No repayment is necessary. We answered a call for help. That's what civilized beings do." "But you've given us more than rescue," Marin insisted. "You've given us hope. For the first time since we left our dying world, we believe that good can triumph over evil in this galaxy." Through the medical bay's viewports, they could see the other ships of the human fleet, maintaining protective formation around the Zephyrian colony ship. The gentle current was being repaired by human engineering teams, who worked with the same efficiency they brought to everything else. But the real change was not in the ships or the repairs. It was in the way the Zephyrians looked at the stars now, not with fear of what predators might lurk in the darkness, but with hope that somewhere out there protectors were watching. The news of the battle had spread quickly through galactic communication networks. On worlds across dozens of star systems, beings who had never heard of humans before suddenly found themselves learning about the species from the quarantine zone that had answered a desperate cry for help. In the Alterian Republic, a peaceful confederation of trading worlds, emergency sessions were called to discuss this development. The Alterians had long suffered raids from Korthak slavers, losing thousands of their people to the hegemony's expansion. Now they whispered about the possibility of alliance with the Deathworlders. On Vegan Prime, the spiritual center of the pacifist coalition, philosophers debated whether beings capable of such violence could truly be trusted. But even they could not argue with the results. Children lived because humans had chosen to fight for them. The Korthak hegemony itself was in chaos. Admiral Vextar had returned with the survivors of his fleet, carrying Admiral Chen's message to the highest levels of their government. For the first time in their history, the Korthaks faced an enemy that fought not for conquest or resources, but out of pure protective instinct. High Command met in emergency session, their scaled faces reflecting fear that few had ever experienced. General Crexmore, Supreme Commander of Hegemony Forces, studied the battle reports with growing unease. "How many ships did we lose?" he demanded. 5 completely destroyed, 1 captured for interrogation of prisoners, his aide reported. The humans lost nothing, not even minor damage to their vessels. And their fleet strength? Unknown. Intelligence suggests this was a single battle group, possibly one of many. Their total military capability remains classified. Crexmore's claws scraped against the metal table as he considered this information. The hegemony had built its power on the assumption that individual strength could overcome any coalition of the weak. But humans seemed to be individually strong and collectively organized, a combination that challenged everything the Korthax believed about warfare. "What do we know about their homeworld?" he asked. The intelligence officer consulted his files. Earth Class 12 Death World. Gravity 1.2 standard. Toxic atmosphere for most species. Constant seismic activity. Weather patterns that include super-rotating storm systems. The planet is essentially one giant training ground for survivors. And they chose to leave this world to help refugees they had never met? Yes, sir. Analysis suggests they responded to the distress call within hours of receiving it. Crexmore fell silent, contemplating an enemy unlike any the hegemony had faced before. Most species fought when cornered or when defending their territory. But humans seemed to fight when others were threatened, which made them unpredictable and therefore dangerous. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other predatory species were taking note of what had happened. The Sindari slavers quietly began avoiding systems near human space. The Vorthon Empire, which had been planning expansion toward the Rim worlds, suddenly found other priorities. Word spread through the criminal underground that there were new players in the galaxy, and they did not tolerate those who preyed on the innocent. But it was among the peaceful species that the real change occurred. For centuries, they had accepted their role as victims, believing that violence was the sole domain of the strong and cruel. Now they learned that sometimes the strongest chose to be protectors instead of predators. On the bridge of the Indomitable Fury, Admiral Chen received a priority message from Earth Command. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the screen, his expression mixing official concern with personal pride. "Sarah," he said, "I hope you realize what you've started. Half the Admiralty wants to court-martial you for violating quarantine protocols. The other half wants to promote you for opening the first friendly diplomatic contact in 2 centuries. What's the official position, sir?" Chen asked. Morrison's stern expression cracked into a slight smile. "The official position is that you responded to a clear threat to human space and acted with appropriate force. Unofficially, the President wants to know if you think we can do this on a larger scale." Chen looked around her bridge at the crew who had followed her into battle against impossible odds to save strangers from slavery. She thought about the Zephyrian children playing in the medical bay, alive because humans had remembered what it meant to protect the innocent. "Sir," she said, "I think it's time humanity stopped hiding from the galaxy and started fixing it." The communication ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts as the fleet prepared to return to human space. But she knew this was not an ending, it was a beginning. The distress call that had brought them here was only one of many crying out across the galaxy. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, other refugees fled from tyranny. Other children faced the brutality of those who saw weakness as invitation. She activated the fleet communication system, addressing all ships simultaneously. "All hands, this is Admiral Chen. What we accomplished here will be remembered by the Zephyrians for generations to come. But more importantly, it will be remembered by every slaver, every tyrant, every being who believes that might makes right. Today they learned that there are consequences for preying on the innocent." She paused, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed less dark and empty than before. "We came from a world that tried to kill us every day, and it made us strong. We learned to hunt, to fight, to survive against impossible odds. But we also learned to protect our pack, to stand between the predators and those who cannot defend themselves. Today we reminded the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength is not our weapons or our ships. It is our refusal to stand by while others suffer." As the human fleet prepared to jump back to their home space, carrying the grateful Zephyrians to safety, subspace communications carried word of their deed to every corner of the galaxy. The message was simple but profound. The Deathworlders had answered a call for help, and they were ready to answer more. In the depths of space, on a dozen different worlds, beings who had given up hope began to look toward the quarantine zone with new eyes. Perhaps the monsters from Earth were exactly the kind of monsters the galaxy needed. The stars themselves seemed to whisper a new truth. The innocent were no longer alone.